Hello, welcome again. In the previous class, we were discussing feminism and its interventions in literature. In this class, we are going to discuss Marxism and its interventions in literature. Well, if you look at carefully, there are a lot of similarities between Marxist literary criticism and feminist literary criticism, because both of them have as their objective a way to fight some kind of injustice. In fact, feminism decries looking at the binary of female and male and how that binary furthers a kind of a gender divide and fosters inequality. Here, the binary is not male and female in Marxist literary criticism or Marxism. The binary is, the proletariat and the bourgeois. What are these terms? In fact, if inequalities take place on the basis of sex in feminist literary criticism and feminism, here class is a site on which these things are battled out. For Marxist literary criticism and Marxism, of course, class is a site on which the battles are chalked out. Okay? In that sense, both these theories have at their root a kind of an extraordinary objective. And what is that objective? To fight discrimination, based on sex, based on class, whatever it is, to root out a system of injustice and discrimination, and to usher in a fair system where everybody is treated equally. All right. So, let us take a quick look at Marxism and then we can come to its interventions in literature. Let us begin it with an insightful comment by Karl Marx himself. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. The moment you read it, you become aware of Marx's basic fight with various philosophical schools or various theories, because their objective is to look at the world and interpret it from a particular way, whereas Marx's dissatisfaction is with that particular venture, because he is not interested in interpreting it, he is interested in changing it from within. Therefore, we can say that Marxism is a materialist philosophy that one tries to interpret the world based on concrete things, material things, the world in which we live in, society. That is one thing. And the second thing is it tries to change it from within. In fact, the emphasis is on the praxial dimension of it. It wants to change because it is not very happy with the existing social structures that only promote inequalities and cause oppression for a particular section of the population and society. So, Marxism tries to conceptualize the world in terms of the material processes working behind social structures, political structures. So, what are these structures? What are those processes? In a short while, we are going to concern ourselves with these questions. So, what are the material conditions that create a rift in society, that cause conflicts in society, and how those conflicts are essential for society to progress? Because for Marxism, in fact, this is what is called dialectics. Dialectics is something that propels Marxist philosophy. What does it mean? It tries to believe that because of the inequalities that exist in society, because of oppression that is there, because a particular class of people is propagating its own ideology at the expense of other cross sections of society, there is going to be a revolution, and the conflict results in the transformation of society. And all these things take place because, what is the source of conflict? The conflict arises because of unequal economic structures, because of unequal distribution of wealth across people. Now, let us say, for instance, let us compare our society to a family. Okay? A family has 4 members, and there are, let us say, for instance, there are only 4 rotis. So, because it is a family, what we do, or what elders do, they try to distribute these rotis, which you can call wealth, in an equal way, so that everybody gets to eat at least something. If the resources are plenty, then these problems do not come, but unfortunately no house can say it has abundant resources, though one may be rich, but human desires are so big or so huge that the more you have, the more you keep wanting, something like that. So, when resources are scarce, how do you distribute it? Do you distribute it according to one's needs, or do you distribute it according to one's position? Just because you are elder, you get to eat 2 or 3 rotis, and the rest of them, they get to eat. So, is it an equitable distribution of the resources? Unfortunately, society is not family, right? Because even in family, these kind of inequalities may exist, but not to a noticeable extent. Maybe, let us assume it. Of course, though family is also have their own problems, but in society these problems are multiplied. So, Marxist intervention is this, that because resources are not equally distributed, there is going to be a conflict, and this conflict result in some kind of revolution, and society is going to change as a result of all these things. And what is remarkable about Marxist philosophy is that it is a kind of a welcome intervention in Western philosophical discourses, in different schools of thoughts, because if other schools of thought, they focus on bringing about an understanding, a radical shift in the understanding of society, here the shift is in changing that society. That is why it is a kind of a welcome intervention. So, before we proceed further, let us take a quick look at some of the common words. We can call them keywords in Marxist literary philosophy. Let us take a quicker look at them, because please remember, we are not exhausting these keywords, some basic words to go by. All right. So, capital or resources, it can be an asset including money, which is basically owned by a few individuals. Capital ultimately is a resource that should be equally distributed in society. Unfortunately, that does not take place. It is owned by very few individuals, and those individuals who have unlimited access to capital are the ones who create inequalities in them, who create societal structures in such a way that it benefits only them at the expense of the majority of the people. So, that is capital for us. And that is a very important word, because anybody who accesses to that becomes the one who initiates inequality, and they want to try only their interests. It creates vested interest. Bourgeois, again, bourgeois is a class of people. Class is again an important keyword, we will come to define it. Bourgeois is a class of people or who have direct access to the capital, who own the capital, and therefore, they are the ones who are interested in maintaining social orders in such a way that it benefits them. That is the bourgeois class. As opposed to that, we have the proletariat. In fact, this is the binary that Marxism deals with. They believe that the entire world is divided into the bourgeois class and the proletariat class, the common class or the working class. Though the working class exist in majority, unfortunately they do not get to enjoy the resources, because they are at the receiving end. They are at the receiving end. So, they are the ones who should initiate change in the society, so that society becomes fair. So, dialectics, it is an important term, we have already discussed that. Dialectics is a process through which opposing forces clash, they conflict, and finally the end result of this dialectics is social transformation. Okay. And in dialectics, class is again an important word. We have said that here the entire world is categorized into different classes. In other words, it's a classification of society into different classes, the so called the upper class, middle class, lower class, below poverty line. So these distinctions take place because on the basis of class, social stratification, and this is again related to means of production, that means capital, asset. Class struggle, we have discussed this concept. Class struggle exists in society because resources are not equally distributed. As a result of this, there is going to be conflict, there is going to be struggle. So this struggle is necessary, because without this struggle, society is not going to change automatically on its own. So these are and hegemony, of course, is a systematic oppression, a systematic dominance of one group over another. These are some keywords, of course, so that they give you an idea of what these things are. And ideology is a belief system, and again ideology is dictated by the bourgeois class because they own the capital, and because they own the capital, they create a system in such a way that it works always in their favor. Now, before we discuss, here is an important concept that is again crucial to understanding Marxist philosophy. This concept is the base and superstructure. Here the binary is, it is not so much a binary, but we still can treat it as kind of a binary, base and superstructure. We are going to take a look at it, a closer look at it. Let us take a closer look at it. So if you, this is based on an analogy of comparing society to a house. Like the house is built on a base. You need to have a strong foundation on which you build walls and all that. Similarly, a society, all the superstructures of society, such as institutions such as education, family, religion, politics, culture, literature, arts, all these are called superstructures. They are based on a base called economic production, means of production. So what is it trying to say? It is trying to say that superstructure, the quality of the superstructure, or the ideological shapings and contours of the superstructure are determined to a large extent by base. The base influences superstructure. And what is the role of superstructure? Because it is dependent on the base, the superstructure has to go on reinforcing the base in very many ways. That is a kind of a vicious circle. Because it has to depend on base, all these include, that is the reason why I said even literature, Marxist literary criticism believes that through literature, because literature is also a kind of a superstructure based on the material production. It most of the times, even these literary arts, they try to promote the interests of the bourgeois people, because they own the capital, they own the resources. So it is a kind of a vicious circle, because it depends, because these structures depend on base, they have to support the base. In the absence of that, they do not stand. So that is an important metaphor we need to understand. Marx himself was influenced to a large extent by the writings of Hegel, a major German philosopher. So for Hegel, again, Hegelian philosophy talks of dialectics. So the material dialectics that Marxism talks of is to a large extent influenced by or colored by Hegelian dialectics. So Hegel looks at dialectics as progress through confrontation, a confrontation between the opposing ideas. So he says that there is thesis. Let us say thesis is something. If you only foster thesis, it is going to result in stratification of society in a particular direction. Therefore, you need a conflict agent. So as opposed to thesis, you have an antithesis or an antithesis. So, there is a kind of a conflict between thesis and an antithesis, and this conflict runs for some time, but it is not going to be there forever. Towards the end, this conflict between thesis and antithesis results in a kind of a synthesis. That is when harmony comes in society. In order for a harmonious society to exist, because our society is also evolving, now probably it is in the conflict stage. So, maybe at the end of the tunnel, at the end of this conflict stage, there is going to be a prospect of a harmonious society which is going to take care of all its members in a wonderful, fair, equal manner. So, for that to happen, it needs to have a kind of a conflict, thesis, antithesis and synthesis. Similarly, even in literature we have something called rasa and virasa. So, between the clash you have samarasa. Samarasa is kind of maintaining equanimity towards the end, a kind of a balance. That balance comes only when after the conflict between rasa and virasa. And a poet goes to the extent of calling this, rasave janana, virasa marana, samarasave jivana. Rasa results in, janana, creation. Virasa results in marana, an annihilation. So, between creation and annihilation exists samarasa, that is life. So, for life to prosper, there must be balance. This balance is quite crucial. So, informed by this Hegelian dialectics, the dialectical materialism that Marxism brings forth, it is a conflict. I mean, here it is a result of the conflicting between two social forces that are necessitated by the material needs, because everybody needs access to resources for their own survival, whether it is the proletariat or the bourgeois, both need equal access. And because there is no equal access, it has to result in clash, and that clash becomes inevitable, so that at a later stage we get a better society. That is dialectical materialism. Okay. And based on superstructure, we have already discussed these things, and base is the world of material processes, means of production that shape the superstructure. And when we say superstructure, all the cultural institutions, all the literary institutions, all the political institutions, they are superstructure, and one goes on reinforcing the other. Yeah, of course, when we say Marx and Engels together, so they are the proponents of Marxism. And now we are going to take a look at how Marxism intervenes in literature, because Marx and Engels do not talk of the integration of their theory in literature. Multiple schools of thoughts have come in to fore, and all of them sometimes competing versions of them have come to the surface, and they claim that theirs is a Marxist school, right. So, though there are several schools of Marxism, Marxist literary criticism, all of them have certain things in common. So, we are going to take a look at them, we are going to take a look at these things and then analyze what are the common things that all these different schools of thought, what do they have in common about Marxist schools. Whatever be the Marxist school, Marxist literary criticism believes that no artistic object is understood without its context, because ultimately all these things have come into existence in the context of certain social order, in the context of certain cultural forces, in the context of certain historical conditions. So, unless we analyze all these things, it is impossible to understand a work of art alone. That means, if you want to read a work of art, this is where ways of reading plays an important role. You may read a novel and enjoy it, that is all right, but an informed being for Marxists, would automatically be able to trace the socio-political influences, the historical influences that will have shaped the production of that literary work. So, you cannot study a work of art in isolation. You have to understand the material forces that have shaped the structure of the work, that have shaped the sensibilities of that literary work. All categories by which artistic objects might be measured are themselves construction of that. So, we may use a literary work to examine something, to measure something, but if we forget that they themselves are the product of social structures, then we would be missing an important point here. Art is a site for playing out a symbolic form of class struggle. Here, literature or arts in general becomes a site in which the so-called societal struggle is played out, because if literature is a representation of society, all the dialectics that takes place in society gets represented in literature, right. So, literature and arts, it becomes a site on which class struggle play out. That is the reason why we need to have a Marxist angle to understand these class struggles and extrapolate those ideas and apply it to our understanding of society. So, these are some things that we can keep in mind. Therefore, typically what does a Marxist literary critic ask when he or she comes across a literary piece, an artistic production? These are some questions probably they might ask, right. So, whom does it benefit if the work or effort is accepted, successful or believed? Supposing a work of art gets a Nobel Prize or a Pulitzer Prize, or if it is considered a classic. What are the forces that have made that work of art popular? Because ultimately we know it very well that, right, nothing is without politics. That is a kind of an axiom that we keep repeating quite often. Nothing is without its political angle. So, who is going to benefit from this? Or if somebody wins an election, why do they win an election? Because they have garnered majority votes. Why have they garnered majority votes? Because people have reposed faith. Majority of the people repose their faith. Why are these majority of the people reposing their faith in a particular party, in a particular structure? So, a Marxist or why a particular literary work gets all the accolades, all the prizes it gets. So, these are the questions. What is the social class of the author? Because author's background also plays a major role, right, in his or her own upbringing. Their background plays a major role. So, what is the background of the author? Because probably it believes that an author, despite best efforts, may not be able to overcome all the influences of his or her background. So, therefore, knowing the background of the author becomes very, very important. So, what class does the work claim to represent? Because a work, though we have said that literature is universal, it is going to appeal to a particular section of people. Which is going to be that section of the people? Who are going to be the readers? What is the and what values is going to reinforce? Is it going to reinforce the values of inequality? Is it going to support the bourgeois class? Is it going to support the proletariat class? Therefore, there are some committed Marxist writers who use literature as a means to promote Marxist philosophy. So, therefore, they use literature as a tool to promote the philosophy, the objectives of Marxism. But these questions are in general to any other literary piece. So, these are some questions probably Marxist literary criticism would ask. What values the book fosters? What values does it subvert? Who is going to be benefited? Who has written this work? What is his or her background? Who are the readers? Why do they read it? What is their background? So, these are some questions. And what kind of class struggles are portrayed in that work of art? What kind of character representation is there? All these things are the kind of questions that Marxist literary criticism would ask when it comes face to face with a literary work or any artistic production. So, here is a progressive writers movement. I have taken a particular interest in this particular movement because it happened here in India. In the 40s, 30s and 40s, it begins gradually, and later it goes on till 60s, founded by Mulkraj Anand, Hiren Mukherjee, Faiz Ahmad Faiz and others. These writers believe that literature is a medium through which socialist ideologies can be promoted. That's the reason why they committed their writings to further the causes of the socialist revolution, the Marxist revolution. They were also committed to bringing in reforms in the society. Apart from their artistic movement, they also actively participated in very many welfare measures, so many activities and things like that. So, here is an extraordinary poem by Faiz Ahmad Faiz. Please read this. I am sure you would understand how, here when autumn comes, you will have read several poems discussing the arrival of autumn, the arrival of autumn in nature. So, a committed Marxist writer looks at even such a natural phenomenon from the perspective of a class struggle, from the perspective of the inequalities that exist in society. Let me read this poem aloud. This is the way that autumn came to the trees. It stripped them down to the skin. Like autumn here represents probably the bourgeois class. And how does it arrive? With its arrival, marks the beginning of the demise of the trees and its leaves, and the trees here and the leaves stand for the working class. So, like that. So, now it becomes the metaphor becomes evident. So, now you please read the poem. It stripped them down to the skin, left their ebony bodies naked. It shook out their hearts, the yellow leaves scattered them over the ground. Anyone could trample them out of shape. Undisturbed by a single moan of protest. Please pay careful attention towards the choice of the word here. Protest. Scattered over the ground, shook their hearts, yellow leaves, helpless. All these are helpless people, The birds that herald dreams were exiled from their song, each voice torn out of its throat. So, birds here could symbolize literature, arts and all that, but with the arrival of autumn, what happens? Because there is no space for birds, no leaves, right? The entire tree is bare, so birds are exiled. They dropped into the dust even before the hunter strung his bow. O God of May, have mercy. Bless these withered bodies with the passion of your resurrection. Make their dead veins flow with blood again. Give some tree the gift of green again. Let one bird sing. The entire poem is rife with images, metaphors, figures of speech, highly borrowed from Marxism. So, even a natural phenomenon would through the perspective of such committed writers becomes class struggle. An entire class struggle is enacted in this short poem in a brilliant way. I am sure the poem gives you through its imaginative way, through its creative way, gives you a glimpse, an understanding of what Marxism is all about and what Marxist literary criticism does. Thank you.